Thank you all for attending this evening's lecture, which is um, very timely, obviously, and at the same time, I hope that it soon becomes not that timely, right? That this becomes more of a lecture in the perhaps the U.S. history class or world history class, not one for parents with contemporary concerns. I guess as just a quick introduction, I would say that this evening's lecture is not in any way about critiquing or passing judgment on our societal response to the pandemic. Is more about how to deal with it and how to deal with not only the pandemic but the way we're dealing with it. Um, so it's really mostly about considering how we should respond as parents and educators, right? What can we do? What in what ways may your sons, our students, be affected by the pandemic and our approach to it? And what things ought we to do to help them deal with it in a very positive, optimistic, and growth-oriented way? There's a medical truism that says that every remedy that has an effect has side effects. And what we're doing this evening is exploring those side effects, right? Whether they're necessary or not is beyond this evening's presentation. So I want to talk about the side effects of the pandemic, sort of the costs of the pandemic. And I have divided them into three categories that I'm calling blockers, destroyers, and infiltrators. So those are the three categories we're going to be dealing with this evening. And what I thought we could do is let me just present, what I see as the challenges or problems in these three categories, and then before offering solutions, I'll be happy to entertain some questions. Um, as long as we then get back to the solutions. Otherwise, this could be one of the most depressing evenings you're going to face in your life. Um, but just to begin with these categories, the blockers would be any side effect that impedes your son's development. The destroyers would be the side effects that attack your son's capacity to develop. Right, so the blockers would impede his development. The destroyers would attack his capacity to develop in the future as well as in the present. And finally, the infiltrators are those side effects that introduce their worldview into your son. And I call them infiltrators because they're sneaky, right? They come in, they don't seem to be the main focal point of attention until you see that your son has developed a different approach or a different worldview because of these infiltrators. So let me get going with the blockers. So the blockers will be measures that we have put in place to fight the pandemic and measures that impede social interaction. So the cost of these measures are mostly developmental, and even though they affect all of us, I think they're very acutely felt by pre-adolescent and adolescent children because they're in such an important learning stage of life, right? Not only academically but socially, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, and so forth. Social interaction uh, for your sons, right? Their social interaction with their peers, their social interaction with adults, with teachers, with you, with neighbors, with people out on the street, their social interactions are the schools for them to learn some of the most important realities in their lives. So the social interactions are the schools for them to learn friendship, to learn love, trust, affection, confidence, right? All these realities that really will inform the way your son is, the way he views himself, the way he relates to other people. It will inform his happiness. It will inform his aspirations. Right? All these things are taught and to your sons and learned by them through social interactions to a large extent. Um, in a classroom, we could talk about friendship, and it's a great conversation to have, and one that we do have with our students, but that is insufficient for your sons to learn friendship. They have to spend time with friends, with other peers, some of whom will become friends. We can talk about trust in a class, but there's no better way for your sons to learn the virtue of trust, the reality of trust, than by being involved socially. So they get to learn what it means to trust somebody and what it means not to trust somebody and how to make that difference and the importance of trust, or what it means to be trusted. What kind of behavior do they have to follow so that they can be trustworthy men? So all these really important lessons are relational and dependent on physical personal contact, that really can't be substituted for any other type of contact in the same full way. Because of the nature of the pandemic, as a transmittable disease and a highly transmittable disease, the number one victim of the pandemic has been, at a social level, it has been the personal interactions. From the just by the very beginning of the pandemic, the message was, don't be with anyone, curtail your social interactions. When you are with people, don't touch anybody, right? This can be transmitted very, very quickly through human touch. And even farther, don't cover your face, right? Cover your face, because the orifices in your face are going to be the main transmitters of the disease. So you got to cover them up to make sure that you don't become a spreader. So now you have young people who need to learn very important lessons about who they are and life and the most important realities of life in a relational way. And it is at this very point that those relations are impeded, right? It'd be like somebody who needs to study really hard for this final exam for the whole year. And let's say that this final exam is worth, half the points of the whole year. And for the 3 weeks before the final exam, he's told, sorry, you can't study. You have a terrible headache. You can't read any books. You can't hear any words. You just can't study. It, will that side effect of his particular problem impede his learning towards the final exam? Absolutely. So I think something like that, similar to that, could happen. Or it's like trying to learn a foreign language. And let's say that I decide I want to learn Italian because it's such a beautiful language, right? But I'm told that all right, I can do that, but I can't listen to any sound or make any sound. So I just have to learn Italian without hearing or speaking any sound. Italian as a foreign language would remain very much of a foreign language to me, because I just wouldn't be able to learn it. It has to be spoken, it has to be heard. So social interactions as a school, once is shut down, right? The school of social interaction gets shut down, and then the education that happens at that school is not given, is not provided to the students, to your sons in the same way. So I'm the blockers, what they're going to do is that they're going to make the language of relationships remain a foreign language. So there are three main blockers that we're dealing with, that I've briefly mentioned: facial coverings, the need to avoid physical contact, and social distancing. So let me talk about facial coverings first. There's a lot of research, and there's been a lot of talk about the physical challenges of facial coverings, of breathing through a mask, and how they may lead to headaches and dizziness and so forth. I'm not really going to deal with those. I'm not a doctor, and you can read those studies as well as I've been reading them. I'm more interested in the emotionally developmental challenges that facial coverings produce. Human beings are biologically programmed to recognize faces. Even babies show a much greater attentional preference for faces. They find faces much more interesting than anything else. And you can just even see little babies that are beginning to learn. They're beginning to learn, what I was talking about before, right? Trust and love and fear by looking at faces. Face masks impair mainly our positive social interactions, our ability to understand, to empathize with one another. I think we've all very much seen how, once you cover somebody's face from the nose down, and all you see is the eyes, that you find yourself looking at that face and searching for an emotion that corresponds to the face, and being somewhat frustrated, not finding it, right? Not knowing if the person is tired, or if he's happy, or if he's sad, or if he's not being able to read that. It's interesting that masks increase the perception of negative emotions and diminish the perception of positive emotions. That's because we tend to identify fear and sadness largely by focusing on the eyes. And happiness is most successfully identified on the mouth region. So, if you think about the mouth as the organ of smiling, right? You're going to identify happiness, cheerfulness, optimism, mostly by looking at somebody from the nose down to the chin. If you look from the nose up in the eyes, that's where you're going to see more sadness, worry, fear. So by covering, right, the lower part of your face and just looking at the eyes, what is happening is that we're transmitting a lot more negativity than positivity, even if we don't say anything, just by looking at those veiled faces on the street. And that is interesting because, again, for us who are older, I think we can filter that and we can understand, well, it's not that the person is sad or mad, it's just I can't really see the full face. So we can filter that. But young people, or your sons, don't have the same filtering capacity. They just don't have the experience, right? The filters by which we can identify emotions and either reject them as false or accept them as true is built through time, right? We're not born with a built-in filter. A filter gets developed through time and experience. So your sons don't have the same filter, no matter how smart they are, how sociable they are. They just don't have it. They haven't lived long enough. Therefore, they're going to be more affected by looking at what they will, I think, subconsciously see as sad, fearful faces around them. It's just, it's hard to read people when you can't really see the full face. And it may also lead to a feeling of detachment from one another, where you just, more like ships passing in the night, as you see people, as opposed to seeing a face that engages you and leads to a greater feeling of attachment. It might even make some people less eager to interact, just because you don't know if the other person is willing to interact, or there's a kind of a mutual facial expression that lets you know that somebody is looking to interact with you that we may not, or at least your sons may not be able to pick up as readily. So that's facial coverings. The second sort of way in which these blockers are affecting your sons is through the message to avoid physical contact. And I don't think, at least I hadn't up to now, given that much thought to the question of the purpose of physical touch between people, right? Things like handshakes, hugs, pats on the back, and whether it is just merely a convenient communication technique, right? And instead of transmitting the same message verbally, we find it easier to communicate it physically, right? So instead of saying, hey, it's really good to see you, and I trust you, and I'm glad that you're here, and I'm willing to engage in conversation, instead of saying all that, we just shake hands, right? Or a mother hugging her child. Yeah, you can say, the mother will say, I love you, but boy, that hug transmits so much more than the words. So is physical touch just a means of communication, or is there something deeper and more essential to our well-being? And it's interesting that a healthy touch between people seems to be as much of a physical and psychological need as food itself, right? That there's research that shows that humans are hardwired to crave touch and actually require it for normal physical, social, and emotional development to occur, right? It's not just a convenient means of communication. We're hardwired to require touch in order to grow, right? To really develop. I've seen studies where scientists even use the term touch starvation to describe the condition experienced by those who have limited physical contact, right? Just as food starvation, touch starvation. And a study from the Texas Medical Center talks about how touch starvation increases stress, depression, and anxiety, triggering a cascade of negative physiological effects. Going an extended period without positive physical touch can even lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, right? Going an extended period without positive physical touch. Touch starvation. It means that we are missing something that we need for us. It's not that we are giving up something that is superfluous to us. It's we're missing something that we need, right? It's like food starvation. We need food. So it is, physical touch is a great way to learn to communicate physically, right? And you can only do that by communicating physically. But also the amazing physiological effects of preventing that human touch that can even lead to physical effects like depression and stress and anxiety and so forth. So this process, I would say, is not only that it's providing anxiety and stress, but it may actually be undermining the immunity that your sons, our students, need to be physically stronger, to be able to not be affected by a virus or any illness. And then thirdly, let me just talk about social distancing, or what I like to call anti-social distancing, because I do want to keep in mind that at some point, God willing, we will not need to do this any longer, and that actually is much more social to be in proximity of one another. It's not, if you see somebody on the other side of the street and they wave at you, right? Somebody you haven't seen in a while, and give you a big old wave and a smile, and they begin to walk away as they're doing that, smiling and waving and walking away. The wave is a sign of friendship, the smile is a sign of friendship, but they're walking away, right? They're not getting closer to you. It may seem that they want to. It may seem that they want to say hi, but actually they're doing something different. So, the social distancing is interesting. It provides, I think, a very strong psychological message, which is fear of others, which is others are potential carriers of deadly germs and life-threatening diseases. And that's what we believe, right? I mean, we believe that that's actually what may happen. I mean, that's the transmittability of the virus and what we call it a pandemic, and an emergency, right? Because of its highly contagious nature. So the message, however, that we are sending by asking for social distancing is you gotta be afraid of other people. You gotta be afraid of being close to the people, because they could be the carriers of this deadly disease. It's interesting how in an NIH study, they found that the youth who are engaged in social distancing to avoid social judgment, right? So young people who distance themselves from others to avoid social judgment, right? To avoid either an uncomfortable social situation or social shame and whatever it might be. Those youth are reported to have more anxiety symptoms, right? If you have to keep your distance because of you're afraid what others are going to think of you, right? If you approximate them, then that leads to more anxiety. However, those who were social distancing because of friends' recommendations, right? Those who distance because friends tell them, better stay away. Um, we don't want you, right? Even that harsh. They report to have greater depressive symptoms, right? So social distancing because of fear of social judgment leads to anxiety. Social distancing because of recommendation leads to depression. And I think it's interesting to see that both depression and anxiety have gone up quite a bit among young people in the last few months. The psychologist at Brigham Young University determined that chronic social isolation increases the risk of mortality by 29%. Right, 29% is quite an increase. And again, it's just because your defenses are depleted. In some ways, your will to live is also under attack. From the Washington Post, from April to May of 2020. So last April to May, which is really the height of the isolation and the stay-at-home orders. In that month, text to federal government mental health hotline went up approximately 1,000%, right, in that month. You can just see sort of the quick and devastating effects of that isolation for people. And the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy found that COVID-19 has tripled the rate of depression in the US, and this in the adult population, in all demographic groups. But especially in those with financial worries. I mean, no, and that stands to reason, right? Those of us with greater financial worries are more likely to fall into depressed thoughts and even depression. So, but I mean, this is all, all this science, all this information, all these studies, I think are telling us things that we knew. And I think that as parents, you guys knew and know because maybe you suffer them yourselves, and it's okay. If you want to really punish a young child, what do? Well, you tell him to go to his room, right? Go to your room and don't come out until we tell you, right? We're going to isolate you. And the message is you're dangerous for society. There's something about you that, we're better off, society, family in this case, is better off without you for a time, for a period of time. Once that young child grows and becomes a teenager, we tend to use the same tactic, right? So if you really want to punish him, what you do is you ground him. You tell him you cannot go out. You can't go out with your friends. We're going to socially isolate you because we know that hurts. So this is, social isolation is not something that by looking at these studies, we realize it is tough on the young. It's something that we've all known and we've all practiced in a wise and prudential manner as parents and educators as a way to punish. But, the young, your sons were in a prolonged punishment last semester, and that was one of the main reasons that we wanted to get him out and get him back to school, and why I think it is good for your sons to be active and to be out. So that's the first category of challenges, of difficulties, which is the blockers, right? The first enemy that we have to pay attention to. The next two I'm going to go through much more quickly than this first one. So the second one is the destroyers. The destroyers are those side effects that attack the capacity that your sons have to learn, to interact with others, to learn those traits and those realities that we learn through interactions, as I was saying before, love, affection, friendship, trust, all those really good things. And the main destroyer is the overuse of screens that has become another side effect of the pandemic solutions or measures to fight the pandemic. And it's the over-screening and what that will do to your sons academically, socially, emotionally, even in terms of their own self-discipline. Now, this is all assuming that the content on the screens is good or neutral. I'm not getting into your son's watching bad content to the screens. I'm assuming there's all good or neutral. I'm even assuming that your son is not misusing the screens, right? That it's not abusing them, it's not sneaking out middle of the night and going to watch a movie or anything like that. And I'm not even going to look at sort of the harmful physical effects of screens and what it might do to the brain, to the eyes, and so forth. Now, in other venues, at other times, I've talked quite a bit and written about screens. So all that applies to this situation. It's just that this situation now is unique because I think for the first time, U.S. parents and even the schools are encouraging the students, your sons, to use the screens more. And that was very much the case last semester when we were doing distance learning. Not as much now that we're in person, but many schools are distance learning and therefore are much more reliant on the screens. The British Association Journal of Sports and Exercise concluded that higher screen time in pre-adolescent children and adolescents was significantly associated with a higher risk of depression, right? All other things being equal, those adolescent and pre-adolescent children who spend more time in front of screens are more likely to be depressed, all other things being equal. And interestingly enough, NIH, in a similar study, concluded that more exercise does not really repair the damage done by over-screening. But it's not that if you say, okay, if I'm going to spend 5 hours looking at the screens, I'm just going to make sure I go for a run. And then, that run will counteract the screens and be fine. What they concluded is, actually, no, you don't, it doesn't repair the damage. I mean, it's still very good to get out and exercise. But the only way to deal with the damage of screens is by minimizing the time that I spend in front of screens, right? It's like somebody who's trying to lose a lot of weight, right? And you say, well, maybe if I exercise, I lose some weight. You might, but also you have to eat less. Somehow you gotta find a way to reduce intake as much as you look for a way to counteract the intake that you necessarily have to do. And your sons will have to do some screening probably, and the older ones at least. The younger ones may not need to do any at all. There's also an interesting study from UCLA that talks about how screen time leads to poorer ability to read social cues from young, especially for a younger audience, right? And it's because when you look at people on the screen, and here I am talking about screens, and here I am on the screen. Hello, everyone. But when you look at somebody in the screen, through the screens, you don't quite pick up the same social cues as you do when you're in person and you're face to face. So it was interesting, even looking at a study about older adolescents and adults, suggesting that reading in digital formats, and I don't, some of you may be used to this and do it very, very well. I can't quite read in a digital format nearly as well as with a real book or paper. But this study mentioned that reading in digital formats over long periods of time may reduce reading flow and comprehension. Again, not a big deal for us at our age. Bigger deal for your sons who are now kind of firing up all their brain activity to be able to read with great flow and comprehend well. So we've talked about the blockers that impeded the growth and provoked depression and anxiety. We've talked about the destroyer, the screens that takes away the paths to to enjoyment of the world around and human interactions and ability to learn and so forth. And just think about the compounding effect of these measures and the compounding effects of the side effects coming together. And now let me just talk briefly about the third, I guess, category of challenge, which is the infiltrators. And the infiltrators are all the verbal and nonverbal communication that that your sons are hearing about the pandemic and about sort of our approach to it. Now, I think that children have a hard time separating danger from culpability, right? That is, they have a hard time separating there's a danger out there, which means that you have to act in a particular way to prevent the danger, from the culpability if the perceived outcome of the danger takes place, right? So, for instance, if you tell a young kid, listen, you have to do all these things, right? The facial covering, the distancing, no physical contact, right? Washing hands. Right? You have to do all these things because there's this germ out there that otherwise you could pick up and transmit, and when transmitted to somebody, it may not affect you, and you may not even know it that you have it. But when transmitted to somebody else who is more vulnerable because of age or some type of physical health condition, that person could suffer a lot. It could even die. Not that we're going to necessarily express it this way, but that, really that is the message that is being sent, right? That there's the message that is around, right? That we all have to, why do we wear facial covers? Not for myself, but for other people, right? Because I may be a transmitter. I could be a transmitter, and I have to prevent myself from being a transmitter. So a young kid is going to listen to that, hear that, and think, okay, if I don't wear a mask, I could be a transmitter, and if I transmit it to somebody, that person could die. If something like that actually does happen, right? If a person they know actually suffers from COVID and dies, I think it's going to be really hard to convince that young kid that actually was not his fault at all. It's going to be very hard because young kids' minds go to details, as you know. And what they're going to think about is that one time when they forgot to wear the mask, or that one time when they didn't wash their hands when they went into that house, and maybe they didn't wash them, or maybe they didn't wash them well enough. Maybe they were still dirty, right? They're going to go to those details, and they're likely to find, I think, maybe not in every case, but I think in sufficient number of cases, they're going to find that one instance that proves that they were a step towards this bad thing that happened. And that may be very hard to convince that that's not the case, right? Because in their mind, they think, well, yeah, you're just saying that to make me feel good. But if you knew that I didn't really wear my mask that one day, right, you may change your mind. There's also another message, I think, that is being sent around, and a lot of this is just not what we're telling, where you're telling your sons, we're telling our students directly, but just the conversation in society, and there's so much of it, right? But another message is the fear of living because of fear of death. Right? We're so afraid of dying that we're actually even more afraid of living, and we can take that. We suffer from it, but we can take that. Your sons are not as well equipped to take in that message and again filtering it. So they might grow up frightfully risk adverse. They might grow up thinking that, man, they just have to take every step to make sure that they're not in danger right now from this pandemic, but there'll be other things in the future. Now, I wonder what your son's approach to the flu is going to be every year for the rest of their lives. Will they be affected by it? Right? When you think about people who grew up through the Great Depression, and your own parents or grandparents, depending on your age, right, may have been there. Um, many of them were affected for life, right? Their approach to money was forever informed by the growing up in the Great Depression. Their approach to throwing out things, to taking care of things, their approach to sort of the fear of not being financially stable, all those things that that in some cases carry with them for the rest of their lives were imprinted in them when they were growing up in that particular time. So I wonder what the risk aversion is going to be from the young generation that is going through this now, and that they may carry with them for the rest of their lives. The more that we talk about how dangerous the world is and the pandemic, the more I think, it's like reading to your sons when they were younger and reading the stories of terrifying dragons and evils, but where there are no heroes, right? One of the beautiful things about those stories is that they're incredible dragons and evil spirits and dangers, but then there's the great hero that can overcome them all and through bravery and courage and love for somebody else. And that's why those stories are so fantastic, right? And as a young child, you develop this image that you too want to be that hero at one point, and you can't wait for the right dragon to come your way, to be able to slay the dragon. But if there are no heroes, it's only the dragons and the dangers, then you would grow up much more terrified, and thinking that there's just a lot of bad things out there that can come your way and attack you. A child's mental peace and safety really comes from sentiments of being safe in a safe environment, right? The world, my neighborhood, my school, my family, right? My parents. The world could be very unsafe. If family is safe, that kid is happy and at peace. Right? A little kid who closes his eyes when he's afraid because he figures if I can't see it, it's not there. They can't quite deal with that danger, right? So they want to shut it off. What you guys do at home, what you have always done at home with your sons, is that you have provided a safe environment just through your presence. But your presence is not only your physical presence, is also your emotional mental presence. Is your being at home at peace and strong and feeling secure. That gets transmitted to your sons that they are safe. They're in a safe environment. It's what I would call transfer anxiety, right? The anxiety that we may feel, you as parents, you as educators, will get communicated to your sons, our students, in subtle, semi-invisible ways. We will not want to do it, but we will not be able to hide that anxiety from them. They will pick it up. Children are hypersensitive to parental emotions, right? They can pick them up very, very quickly. So this concludes sort of the presentation of the side effects, the bad things that can happen. I'm happy to take a couple of questions now if you want. Again, I don't want to leave you depressed, but if anybody has any comments or questions, I can take them, and then I promise to talk about what we should do and some of the ways to counteract these side effects.
Thank you, Alvaro. Yeah, there's one question or comment that came in, and it was asking whether maybe we're just adapting to a new culture. Where touch isn't so much a handshake, but a pat on the back, and then those more intimate, encounters of the handshake and whatever else are just reserved to family. And reminds me of my own family's roots in Latin America. Each country has its culture. You go to one country and it's like one kiss on the cheek. Another country is two kisses on the cheek. So is this just like an adaptation, or is this something different that we're seeing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember a very, very, very emotional, happy-go-lucky I'll say Mediterranean student, just to I don't want anyone, I don't want anybody to be offended, but his Italian was beautiful. But he has a Mediterranean student who, at one point, something really good happened, and he said, "Mr. De Vicente, in my country, the headmaster, when something like this happens, he gives me a kiss." And I said, "Well, that's fantastic. You go back there and tell him to do that, because I'll give you a hug if you want to, but that's about as far as I'm going to go." Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some cultural, there's some cultural realities here, right? And not every culture expresses physically the same way. That is very, very true. But I do think that changing the way that a culture expresses itself is not that simple, right? I don't think it's as simple as saying, okay, all right, people, we've been doing this for centuries and centuries and centuries, and it's really hardwired into our brains, right, from the moment of birth. We're going to stop doing it. We're going to do this other thing. I just don't think it's that simple. I don't think that our hardwiring can be changed that quickly without suffering some consequences from it. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more studies about this. You know, the ones that I've seen, I've been reading up to now, they have to do with the lack of physical expression that we're used to, and the suffering. Whether that can be replaced with other physical expression, possibly, right? I mean, there may be maybe the forearm handshakes, right? You know, strength and honor, right? There may be some things like that that we could do over time. But I do think that there's something beyond just the physical contact. I think it's the skin to skin contact as well, right? So, you know, it's not just the fact that, I mean, shaking hands with gloves on is not as powerful as shaking hands with bare hands. There's a lot more communication that happens when the skin touches skin. So it's not just the mere act of you know, hands coming together. But there's something about that physical contact that I think is important. But you know, it's going to be a fascinating field of a study for many researchers for years, I'm sure.
No doubt. And we have two really excellent questions have come in. I have a suspicion you're going to address these, because I think naturally the questions that are starting to come in is, you know, okay, we see this, we feel it ourselves. What do we do? And that's probably what you're going to get at now, just kind of as a preview. And I'm going to pay attention. And if you don't, you know, fully address it, I'm sure you will, but I'll maybe bring it up after this second section. But one is, how do you encourage optimism and the silver lining in this super isolating time? And the second one is that our children have a feeling like they've been cheated out of part of their life, sports, schools, friends. How do we deal with this? My thanks to the questioners, because these are probably good cues for what's about to come our way.
Yeah, no, great questions. And I think I hope to, I will even make a little note here so I don't forget. Yeah, let me get to, I guess, let me get to those questions and perhaps others with this whole idea of what should we do? What can we do? Right, the silver lining that you were talking about. And let me just talk about some countermeasures to each category of side effects, right? So if the side effect was the blocker, right, the impeding interaction. So I think the countermeasure is to break through the blockers and activate interaction. So the number one remedy, I believe, is increasing family time. I think all of you have the greatest antidote and the greatest countermeasure right there at home, right? Increasing family time. And in whatever way works for you, right? Through special meals, maybe dinner takes, and I've heard from many of you how during the shutdown last semester, you know, you actually had great family interactions, and all of a sudden everyone is helping out a lot more and having great dinners. And you know, your sons children are learning to cook in ways that would not have learned before, or bake. I think more people learned to bake in the last 4 months than in the previous probably 100 years. It may be. I don't have a study on that. I'm just making that up, really. But so increased family time, I think it's a great countermeasure, number one remedy. Meals, outings with the whole family, with individual children, going outdoors as much as possible. One of the beautiful things about this area, DMV, is that we do have a lot of great outdoor spaces. Some beautiful hikes, or if you're more of the city dweller like I am, even just going down to the national mall. I mean, there's some really nice places to walk around and spend time outdoors. I would say even when you're in the house, as much as possible, is spending time in the same physical space, even if you're doing different things, right? But same physical space, just be in the physical presence of one another, right? And then somebody can be, one of you can be reading, another one could be working on something else, and a couple of your sons are doing their homework. There's a great dispersion that can take place in families, right? Where even if you have dinner together, and then right after dinner, everyone goes and they go to the room and they get dispersed. And sometimes that maybe that has to happen. I mean, I do recommend to students in the high school that they find a workspace for themselves that is separate from the bedroom. So some of that has to happen. But as much as possible, I think being in the physical presence of one another helps. Even if you're not talking because you're engaged in work and they're engaged in their studies, it's the fact that you see them, they see you, that is, that we're there present to one another. So that's I think the first countermeasure is just increase family time. Another countermeasure is going along with the comment that was made earlier, is increasing human touch, even in the family, right? So the human touch of there's age appropriate and comfortable, right? So I mean, we all have memories perhaps of grandpa coming over and is squeezing your cheek, right? And I don't know that there is a single child in the world that likes his cheek being squeezed by grandpa, but that's just an interaction, right? So whatever physical human touch seems appropriate depending on the age of your children, of your sons. But that, I mean, just perhaps be aware that they need to feel your presence more than usual. That they need to be hugged more than usual. That they need their hand shake more than usual. They need, whatever, squeeze their head to your chest, whatever you do that is natural to you, that is comfortable, that your sons would also like. Maybe we need to smile more, right? When you're at home and you can, assuming that you're not wearing a mask at home, you can smile more, that they can see happiness that way. I knew somebody, and I mean, this fellow did smile a lot. But I'm not saying that his technique works, but his technique was, he said, if you want to be able to smile the whole day, as soon as the alarm clock goes off, before you even get out of bed, just smile in bed for 15 seconds. I must say, I've never tried it. I thought about trying it a couple of times, but I can never quite think about it when I first, the alarm clock goes off. My first thought is, no, I should stay here and smile for 15 seconds. I'm also afraid that I may just smile for 15 seconds and then sleep for another 2 hours, right? If I don't get out of bed right away. But I don't know, if you want to give that a try, let me know how that works. And if it works, I'll try to, recommend it to all your sons at some point, that they smile in bed before they get out of bed. But whatever technique you want to use, see if you can smile more, to be more expressive, right? Even if it feels a little bit artificial, to be more expressive, to try to, the facial expressions at home, during dinner, whatever it might be, to, reproduce some of those expressions that they're not going to be able to pick up during the day otherwise. Finding a way to charge yourselves emotionally, so that when you spend time with your children, you have more to give. I remember years ago being very moved by seeing a friend of mine, a middle-aged fellow who was coming back home, right? Was going to have dinner with him and his family, and he was coming back home from work. I happened to get there before he did. And just looking at this man walk up the driveway, you could tell that this had been a long week, right? I mean, jacket over his shoulder, tied down, um, slow walk, is just tired. And as soon as he opened the front door, his 5-year-old daughter came down, bouncing down the stairs with this paper where she had drawn, a few stick figures and a, huge yellow sun with a yellow, spilling outside of the circumference of the sun. And she came down, super happy, daddy, 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 look at this. And it was so moving to see his expression and how it changed from tiredness to a huge smile, and grab her and sat her on his knee and spend minutes looking at this drawing that there was really, I mean, from an outside observer, there was really not that much to look at. And looking at this drawing and asking questions and talking about it and complimenting her and kissing her and hugging her. And it was just really moving to see that this is a man who clearly has made a mental decision that when he walks through that door, he's going to power up his emotional energy so that he has more to give to his children. And also facilitating peer interaction for your sons, right? Especially if they're not in the school, right? If they're in the school, they're already getting that peer interaction. But if they're not in the school, if they're going to a school that is not in person, this is much more important. I mean, it could be small groups, could be outdoors as much as possible. I remember many years ago, a friend of mine who was a counselor at a sleepaway summer camp. And this was a week-long summer camp, but he was a counselor for 4 sessions, back to back to back, right? So it's 4 weeks and would have a weekend in between each session, right? So he would come home on a Saturday afternoon, and then late Sunday evening, he would go back out to begin the next session. And whenever he was back home, he was in his 20s at this point, he wanted to get together and talk. Because as you say, I just crave conversation with somebody my age. I'm with 10, 11, 12-year-olds all week long, talking with them, serving them, spending time with them. I want to talk with somebody my age. I want to talk about things that really, really matter to me. And that's just a very natural craving for that peer interaction. Well, I think the same thing happens to your sons, right? If they're home all the time, it's not that they don't love you, they love you, right? They love being there, but they crave the peer interaction, right? They need to get out and be with peers and just their own age group and talk about whatever they're going to talk about and spend that time together. So as much as we can do to facilitate that peer interaction, the better, right? Again, watching out to make sure there's healthy interaction, right? All the precautions you usually have, but just being more eager to have your sons interacting with their peers. The second category that we need to have some countermeasures is the sort of the destructive power of screen time. And, a couple of things that we could do. One is to decide, well, since your sons have to spend perhaps more time on screens because of a school, it is a great opportunity to draw the distinction between a computer for work and a computer for entertainment. And now you have to use the computer for work, which is what the computer ought to be used for, right? Now you do have a use for it that is bona fide, and we're going to sanction and support. But what if we say, all right, because you're already using the computer so much for work, we're just not going to use it for entertainment. I just don't want you in front of the screens so long. You're already going to be, this period of time in front of the screen for your studies. Let's just eliminate the rest, right? And make sure that the rest of the time you're out and about in personal interactions a lot more. It could be actually, from that point of view, it's a silver lining. maybe the pandemic is a great way to reestablish order in the way your sons use the computer in a way that would have been harder if there wasn't a reason like this one, right? Where now you can say, no, no, this is now, it's a work tool. We're not going to use it as entertainment anymore. You may, frankly, those of you whose sons are spending, some time in front of the computer every day, if they're doing social, distance learning, or if we ever have to go back to that, it may be totally appropriate for you to have your son take a sick day and not go to virtual school that day and say, you know what, I know that physically you look healthy and all that, but I'm going to give you a sick day so that you don't have to be staring at that screen all day today. It's a mental health day. It could be an interesting way to communicate to them that we just don't think that looking at screens is that healthy, even if it's for a really good purpose, like school or work. But that we're going to be that careful about it. And if we're going to be that careful about it when we're dealing with a screen for work, so much so if it is for entertainment. Great chance to pull back on video games and shows, right? Same idea. We're already using the screens for work. Let's just not, forget those shows, forget those video games. Let's just, do more family entertainment, family activities. It is harder on you parents, right? Because you got to, more creativity, and you have to be more present, right? It's much easier for your sons to just look at a screen and not have to worry about them than if you have to engage them and keep them entertained, or at least monitoring how they're entertaining themselves. If we're going to use screens, I would say maybe that they be communal screen time if for entertainment. So ideally for school only, but if you also want to use it for entertainment, that it is communal. And communal, I don't mean your son playing a video game with another kid who is 10 miles away, right? And they're looking at each other through the screen, or maybe not even that. They're just playing the same video games. That's not what I mean by communal. By communal, I mean in person, in the same room, looking at the same screen, watching the football game together, right? Watching the movie together. And the important thing about that is that, yeah, we're watching something together, but we're right here. And we can talk, we can communicate, we can, ask questions, we can talk about the game or the movie, whatever it might be, right? We're in each other's presence. And then thirdly, the third category, which is the infiltrators. The hardest because the one that is least visible. One of the things that we started doing here at the Heights, and it's really thanks to one of you parents, and after having a conversation with you, is that I don't like to talk about safety protocols, but rather about CDC guidelines. And the reason for that is that I do want to communicate to the students, to your sons, that these are guidelines that we ought to follow for the good of the community, because they've been given to us by an authoritative source that has told us that this is a way to help, right, our community. As opposed to safety protocol, that means if you don't do this, something really bad is going to happen, which would deal with that, again, the invisible threat of your sons feeling themselves culpable if something bad actually does happen. But also, I think it's important for us to express hope that very soon we can stop using all these guidelines and that we can get back to normal. I don't like this conversation about the new normal. I think that's something we gotta fight. It's not the new normal, it's the new abnormal. It is abnormal. We have to get back to something better. I know that I didn't hear myself, but somebody told me that at one point Dr. Fauci commented that we may never go back to shaking hands again. And I really hope that that's not true. I mean, I would encourage you to actually practice shaking hands at home, so that your sons don't forget about how to do that. I think it is okay. It's okay for us to accept to give up. For the good of other people, to give up comforts, right? But I think we have to be careful about being really okay with giving up natural behavior, right? Maybe we have to, and we've had to. We do for a period of time. But there's a huge difference between giving up going to a football game because of avoiding gatherings and giving up going to mass because of avoiding gatherings. Right, those two things are not the same. Right, from a cold clinical point of view, they may both look like gatherings that have to be avoided, and it may be that in the peak of a pandemic, you may have to avoid both, right? Maybe, but they're two very different things, and your sons may not have the experience to be able to understand that yeah, going to football game and going to church are not equal in value, right? And as a family, we don't consider them even close to being equal in value, right? There are many reasons for which we may give up going to a football game, from expense to discomfort, difficulty, to the fact that our team is really bad, whatever it might be, right? But there are really very few reasons why we wouldn't go to church, and we'll give that up. And also, finally, the in terms of silver lining, I mean, praying, right? Praying that we can help our loved ones, right? Praying for our loved ones, praying for their health, praying for their, praying that they may be happy in their lives. The idea of how to tell students or how to talk to students who feel they may have been cheated out of their lives is an interesting one, because what I've seen with the older students in high school, I mean, last year's seniors, whose last semester was very different, and even this year's seniors and students, children are very adaptable if they know that you are on their side, trying to do everything you can to make their lives good. As long as they know that you have their back and you have their best interest and you're really trying to do the best you can, they're very adaptable. I have been extremely gratified and moved by seeing your sons, our students here on campus. And as many of them have told me, they say, we're so happy to be here. That, yeah, we got to put up with all this stuff and it's a pain, right? And, the seniors are not going off campus for their meals. Sports are truncated. I'm teaching in a tent in the middle of the parking lot, right? There's a lot of these things that we're doing, but they say, we're just so happy to be here. And they say that because we know that the Heights has done everything that it can to get us here. And we appreciate that. And I'm sure it's the same thing with them and you at home, right? They know that you're doing everything you can to make their lives good. If that's the case, they really don't feel that cheated, right? They don't feel that cheated out, because they feel that's the way it happened, but my parents have my back, and I'm getting something else instead. And what I'm getting is better than most, right? They do have a sense for that. So I think that's the way it works. And just to conclude, really, and understand really to conclude, because otherwise we're going to go over quite a bit, is I give you three categories of challenges, right? The blockers, the destroyers, and the infiltrators, and three different and ways to deal with each one of them. I'll give you a fourth way to provide some countermeasures, because it's always more solutions than problems, and is to deal with our own anxiety, with your anxiety as parents, our anxiety as educators. This summer was fairly stressful, because we're trying to figure out, what do we have to do to get this place open, and are we going to be able to be open no matter what we do, right? One thing was very clear as soon as we hit the faculty workshop right before the beginning of the school year, is that these are guidelines we have to follow, and we're going to have to remind the students. But the school year begins now. And from now on, we're no longer administrators looking for ways to comply with guidelines. We're educators. We're 100% dedicated to the interaction with the students who come here. And for that, we have to be at peace mentally. We have to be in a good place spiritually. We have to be loving towards them, because they will know. Once they come on campus, they'll know. They'll know whether it is the old Heights or not, depending on how we relate to them. And even more so for you at home. the main solution, silver lining, countermeasure, protection for your sons is your own mental peace, spiritual peace. You need to find that perspective that only God and prayer can provide. And I know that all of you do this, right? The ultimate silver lining is the pandemic may be a divine call to get us to do what we should do in any case, which is to turn to God in our lives. And what a lesson that is for your sons if they get to see us, to see you go through this very weird, difficult time as a faithful man and woman would go through it. So let me now just stop. This is a hard stop, and I can entertain questions or comments.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Alvaro. And before the first question, just a note, you can submit questions using the Q&A box. Also, feel free to just raise your hand, raise your virtual hand, and I will virtually call on you and allow you to speak if that's your preferred mode of questioning. But the first question, what about the stress of our boys when they realize the financial security of our family is not what it used to be 6 months ago?
That's a great question because it's a very real question. I think that what your sons find stressful is not the financial reality, but it's your reaction to the financial reality, right? And what I always have in mind, if you guys remember that movie, Life is Beautiful, about the concentration camp and the father and his son in the concentration camp, and it's all this incredible scenes of this man in the concentration camp, creating a whole different reality for his son, right? So that he thinks that it's a play, and the boy can be a kid and be happy. What your sons are going to be anxious about is not so much, whether you have to sell the house or stay in the house, sell the car or keep the car. It's not about that. It's about how you go through it and your reaction, right? If you go through it with mental peace, with your heart in God, praying, your sons will not only not suffer the stress and the anxiety, but they will be empowered for the rest of their lives to know that financial means are means, not nearly as important as relationships, as faith. So God provides, but what He provides may not always be money. It provides something much bigger, which is grace for us to deal with what we have to deal with strength and faith.
Let's see, and we have no further questions. So if anybody has any questions, do feel free to submit them, and or just raise your hand. And I guess something that comes to my mind is, one important thing as parents is for ourselves to manage our response to these things. Any guidance as you try to help your children process other people's response to the things that we see, whether it be someone at the grocery store who's less than kind, or a relative who's just loves talking about politics, maybe to a fault, in an overly dark way. Any guidance there, Alvaro?
Yeah, I know that great. That's a great question because it often requires a lot of nuancing, right? And that depending on who the person, if it's a stranger, is different from if it is a relative. That you can't really put in a particular category of somebody that you don't want to be with. But I think in general, what I think is that any interaction with someone else, right? That you see, your son's interacting with someone else, any interaction that is negative, And it can be negative in two ways. One is that the message the person gives is a message that you don't want your sons to abide by, or negative in that the interaction was just tough, difficult, uncomfortable. Um, if it is negative from the content point of view, right, a message you don't want your sons to abide by, I think that's where a conversation and filtering takes place, right? Again, age appropriate, but hey, let's talk about this comment that so and so made, right? Let's talk about this conversation with your uncle, right, during dinner, where he mentioned this. Let's look at it this way, right? Don't I know this is what he said, but here's why he may have said this, and why this doesn't apply to you, doesn't apply to us. So that's filtering. If the negativity comes from just an interaction that was difficult, right? The person in the grocery store that is not that kind, then I think often the best response is not to join in the criticism of the person, but to say, we just don't know what difficulties that man may have in his life, right? We don't know what may have happened to him. Let's say a prayer for him, right? Let's say a prayer that whatever is burdening him goes away, or that he learns to deal with it. Because I think it's just the good thing about that is that you stop the kind of the gossiping and criticism that could ensue, but also you provide a positive way to do something with the interaction, right? That is not just forget about it, because maybe the kid can't quite forget about it, and you provide an explanation of why the interaction. There's no you kid, but he has something in his life that we don't know about, but makes him be nasty to you at this particular time. You didn't do anything wrong, son, right? Assuming that he didn't do anything wrong, right? And let's do something positive. Let's pray. Let's pray for him. So I think that's in general ways to approach that might be helpful.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Alvaro. In the absence of any further questions, I suppose it is a Thursday night, so we'll all be up and at 'em bright and early, getting our kiddos back to the heights.
That's right.
But thank you all very much for joining us. Always good to be with you, even from a distance. And thank you, Alvaro.
Great. Thank you, Rich, and thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you soon.